Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, those of you who follow the show, and we're grateful, very grateful, blessed that there are several thousand of you now. God bless you. You know that we talk a lot on this program about leadership. And there is a crisis of leadership in this country. It's not just in politics, but it's probably most noticeable there. And so we thought it would be great to have someone on the show who has been working in the political theater, as it were, for many years, and who actually has taken stands at some personal cost and professional cost in order to stand up for the people, to be a servant leader. And his name is Randy Hillier. Thanks for joining us today, Randy. I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
It's an absolute pleasure, Leighton. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. We're going to dive into some topics and learn more about you. Of course, many people will know you and the fights that you've been fighting on behalf of really all Canadians. But before we go there, we have our framing aphorisms. These are chosen somewhat in your honor. The first one, don't be offended, is actually from our Prime Minister, who has said many things, many hurtful things, many things that might be considered hate speech under his new bill. This one, I think, should qualify. He said, "We are going to end this pandemic by proceeding with the vaccination. There's still a part of the population fiercely against it. They don't believe in science or progress and are very often misogynistic and racist. They take up some space. This leads us as a leader and as a country to make a choice. Do we tolerate these people?" Next is from the man who might be our next prime minister. Many people are hoping so, Pierre Poilievre, who said, "If the carbon tax really was about saving the world, we would presume the largest industrial emitters of carbon would have to pay it." Next, from Sophocles, one of the giants of ancient Greece, who said, "All men make mistakes, but a good man yields when he knows his course is wrong and repairs the evil." And finally, from a giant of American politics, perhaps their greatest president, many people would say so, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "You can please some of the people some of the time, all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but you can never please all the people all the time." And that's certainly true in politics, as our guest well knows. Well, who's our guest today? Well, it's Randy Hillier. Randy is before he became a politician, was a licensed construction electrician. People will be glad to know that he actually had a useful job before going into politics. But he's also been a Canadian politician who has served as a member of provincial parliament in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario for 15 years. He also represented the riding of Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston as an independent MPP from 2019 to 2022. And there's some controversy around how that situation evolved. He was initially elected as a member of the Progressive Conservative Party, which no longer exists, and he remained as a member until 2019. Despite announcing he would run for election under the banner of the Ontario First Party in November of 2021, he announced in March 22 he would seek re-election. He sat as an independent until the dissolution of Parliament on May 3rd, 2022, and then afterwards he went back to a landscaping and excavating services business. So, Randy, I want to start here. I'm interested to know. Obviously, you had some degree of success as a licensed construction electrician. What caused you to decide initially to go into politics?
Well, there was one other little interlude. In 2002, myself and a few other fellas started a group called the Lanark Landowners Association. And
Right, I
our
read about that.
slogan was, "This land is our land, back off government." We had gotten fed up with government intrusion into our lives and our properties in rural Ontario. And a few of us got together. I was chosen to be the president and chief mouthpiece for the organization. And over the next 6 years, we built that into a very powerful group of about 15,000 members across Ontario. And we were very noted for our aggressive but intelligent advocacy and opposition to the intrusions into private property, and for the advancement of the greater protection of property rights in our Constitution. We held many tractor rallies, closed down Queen's Park, Parliament Hill, government buildings, borders, highways, and were quite successful in. But after about 6 years of very strenuous and exciting, exhilarating advocacy, I decided to take a little break and retired from that for a period of time. And it was just one of those things, Leighton, that it fell in a couple months after I relinquished leadership of the Landowners Association, which had become the Ontario Landowners by then. The nomination for the Progressive Conservative Party in Lanark-Frontenac came up, and so I threw my hat in the ring, and 15 years later, I left.
Well, that explains why you got into politics. Obviously, you felt you had something to offer and you want to make a difference in people's lives, especially in your own community, which you served very admirably. But like many people, but you perhaps more than others, your life changed very much in the early part of 2020 when we were beset by something that is commonly called the COVID-19 pandemic. And during that period, you were a staunch opponent of COVID lockdown measures and laws in your province and also nationally. So, taking you back, I guess, 4 years now to that time, when did you first start to realize that something was dreadfully wrong about the way that governments in Canada were handling this quote unquote health crisis?
Well, like most people, there was a great deal of uncertainty, but it was
Mhm.
obvious within days that what we were doing was wrong. And what we were doing was causing far more injury, far more harm, far more despair and anxiety than uh, what COVID was doing. So it wasn't. We declared the state of emergency here in Ontario on March 17th. My first opportunity to speak in the legislature was March 26th, and at that time I said, something is wrong. Our cure is far worse than the disease. Nobody was
Right.
seeing anybody dropping dead in the streets.
Mhm.
The hospitals were closed up and there was nobody in them. Nobody could get medical attention. Uh, People were fraught with anxiety over losing their homes, businesses, incomes, jobs. Um, but we weren't seeing any evidence of an actual pandemic. Uh, we were seeing um, some very atrocious actions in our long-term care homes. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so I started speaking out first against the state of emergency and the lockdowns,
Right.
and then through April, within a month, we knew that there was no pandemic. We know even the senior staffers knew that they had overplayed their hand. And I spoke about this down in Washington recently with Senator Ron Johnson at the Senate.
Right. I
Uh,
saw that you were down there in the US with your friend Pastor Hildebrand, who was a
yes,
recent guest
quite.
on our program.
The Canadians reinvaded Washington this year. Um, so, so it was obvious that and we had the political parties like this was a big con job, and it was a very good con job, Leighton.
Mhm.
Uh, Many people made buckets and gobs full of money out of the con, and many people paid the price. Um, and many of our politicians also got caught in the con. Um, Not all of them. Some of them were part of the con, but most of them, by and large, from what I've seen, got duped with the hysteria, with the fawning adoration and attention, um, and the and the 24/7 hysteria that was being promoted. Um, and But it was obvious to me um, when the Diamond Princess cruise ship docked. To me, that was the real kicker in early April,
Right.
because that was like the absolute best controlled laboratory experiment for COVID. And we found out
Mhm.
at that time that uh, there was no increase in deaths on the quarantined Diamond Princess than
Mhm.
what happens on any cruise ship. Uh, for a lot of people don't realize that a major cruise ship, uh, there's one death per week uh, on a cruise
Really?
ship. Yeah,
Wow.
um, and
That's
but it
remarkable.
and for over 2 months, the Diamond Princess was quarantined at sea, and 9 people died from apparently COVID. The same number that would have died if there hadn't been a pandemic. So
Right.
that's
Right.
just one little illustration. There's many of them, and of course, many more, far more credible and scientific individuals came out
Mhm.
with absolute proof that this was a
Mhm.
con job.
But your situation, you present a very interesting case because, as you say, at that time you were a political insider. You saw what was going on. You saw the corruption. You saw that you could have participated in that. You could have been one of the ones who went along with that, who, as you say, profited. But instead, in June of 2020, you're at a rally. You're protesting it in at Queen's Park, and then that led to all kinds of trouble because then, of course, then you are a dissident, and by the fall of 2020, the public health officials were coming after you. Undaunted, in November of 2020, there you are again at another rally at Queen's Park, and then you're out at the end of December. You're at a Christmas. You're relentless. But what
I
I'm
poked
curious
them
to
at
know
every
is
opportunity, Lee.
you
At
did,
every
you did,
opportunity, I
yes,
would poke them. Um,
yes. And
and
why? But why, Randy? I mean, you could have gone the other way. You could have filled your pockets with money.
oh,
Why?
you know,
And I don't want to insult you, but I mean, why did you turn the other way and expose yourself to all of this public vilification and really, I mean, you took a lot of hits publicly to your reputation for the stances you took against COVID, against the government's handling of COVID, when you could have just gone along and been one of the ones who just quietly filled your pockets. So why did you make that choice?
well, because I have children and grandchildren, and in the and I have a conscience,
Ah,
and this was, as I said, 25 years earlier. Uh, I thought government was intruding too much into our lives and our properties and our
right.
livelihoods.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, we saw on March 17th that uh, instead of cracking the door open towards the road to a dystopia and the road to authoritarianism, we swung the door wide open. We said, here we are. We are going to travel down this path where you will have no freedom, where the government will be able to tell you how many people you're going to have in your home, how many people that you're allowed to have at Christmas time. Um, yeah, they're going to create bubbles that people will be allowed to circulate within only their confined bubble. Um, that the government will determine when and if you are going to be allowed to conduct your business or to be employed. Um, this was not under any reading of history. We know that the only way people can be safe is when their freedoms are safeguarded, and
Right.
there is no safety in having your freedoms removed. And
Mhm.
this was part of the con as well, that to make people believe that they were going to be safer
Mhm.
if they
Mhm.
had zero freedoms. And we're still on
Mhm.
that path. And there's still many
We are.
Canadians
We
who
are.
who
Yeah.
believe that freedom is dangerous, not
Mhm.
slavery.
Yeah, and we would still, I think, still be locked down if it were not for uh, maybe the most important world event of this century, certainly the most important event in Canada that you participated in quite actively. And of course, that's the Freedom Convoy in the early part of 2022 that was precipitated by an incident where you called a certain minister a terrorist.
So listen, this is one of my restrictions on me. I am
Okay,
not allowed to speak of certain things. That
really?
topic is one of them on
Well, we
social media.
won't go there then.
The courts have
Are
been
you?
no, that's okay.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
you know, but yes, that the events of February 2022 in Ottawa were powerful. They were profound. People don't realize that expression of opposition, that magnitude of public opposition. Uh, During those events, it was every province in our country and the feds announced that they were ending the mask mandates, that they were
Yes.
ending
Yes.
the curfews, that they were
Hmm.
ending the travel restrictions. Um, you know, everybody ought to realize, and in a in any government, even in a communist country, um, the legitimacy of the government comes from the governed. People over, we had done a whole series of no more lockdown rallies in opposition since early in 2020. And people were doing this across the country, but they were allowed to be contained and segregated. What happened in Ottawa is everybody came together, and there was no way they could be compartmentalized or segregated, and it
Hmm.
was obvious to the world now that
Hmm.
Canadians were leading the charge, and we're going to be successful in
Hmm.
ending, or at least partially
Yeah.
ending, the con job.
Well, you were it certainly brought a level of awareness that did not exist before then. But as I go back and I researched the Freedom Convoy and your involvement in it, one of the things that really struck me is that you were one of the ones who was calling v- most vociferously for the opening of a dialogue with the federal government, with the prime minister. And this is really you're at the forefront there, saying, look, let's talk about why we're here. Let's talk about what the federal government needs to change in order to, what is causing all these people, to be there and peacefully protesting, but representative really the pain that was being suffered throughout the country. That dialogue didn't happen, and as we sit today, it still hasn't happened, has it?
No, I held a number of press conferences at and during Ottawa, and I remember very clearly saying, this was one of the things. Nobody was talking to anybody. We were all talking over one another.
Hmm.
Nobody was listening to anything. Uh, and you know, again, I've been in elected office for a period of time, and even before that, my public advocacy role. Never in my history had I ever seen. Well, I conducted hundreds of protests myself, Leighton, and the landowners. And every time we did that, somebody from government would come out to talk with us, even if it
Hmm.
was an attempt to placate us, an attempt to co opt us, or an attempt to actually learn. Um, there was at least the effort shown. And of course, the coward went to the cottage when the trucks rolled in to Ottawa, and um, and he had painted himself into a trap because everybody was either a racist, a misogynist. We were taking up space, um, homophobic, and of course, when you paint um, your don't want to use the word adversary, but when you um, paint the other side with those colors, with that, um, you know, it makes it very difficult, made it impossible for
Hmm.
anybody in government
Hmm.
to have an actual discussion because,
Yeah.
who wants to have a discussion with a racist and who wants to have a
Hmm.
discussion uh, with a homophobe and whatever other term that they used.
Right.
So
Right.
there was just no. ability for him, even if he had wanted to talk, uh, he would have had to climb down from that hateful language that he had used.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of doing that, instead of being humble and saying, "Well, I shouldn't have used that language," he doubled down and said, "Now we're also criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a criminal conspiracy, an insurrection, an attempt to overthrow our democracy."
Mm-hmm.
And he just kept digging himself a bigger and bigger hole
Mm-hmm.
until such time that he went too far, even by um, anybody's measure, with the invocation of the Emergency Act, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously has been ruled ultra vires and unconstitutional since. Um, but that's what a liar does. That's what a dishonest person does. A person with a conscience and a person with integrity would have some humility, some
Mm-hmm.
humbleness, and say and seek forgiveness for their errors.